Greetings, friends, and I do hope that this greeting does find you remaining well and safe. As far as I know, we still are, and for that I am very grateful that in this last year of our pandemic journey that all of our families and elders and seniors of the community at Gloria Dei have remained free of the COVID, have not fallen ill with COVID. And for that, I am very grateful, as I know we all are. It has been some time since I have taken the opportunity to share my heart with you, and I want to do that today. Lent is almost upon us, and I must confess it is my least favorite season of the church year, but especially so this year. The season begins on Ash Wednesday with its dual emphasis on our mortality and our sin. In normal times, I find the imposition of ashes necessary and meaningful. But in this year of pandemic, do we really need a ritual to remind us that death is part of life? I think that the SARS coronavirus 2 has done that very well this year, very effectively. Wherever we live, whoever we are, whatever our faith or non-faith, COVID has done more than smudge the truth of our mortality on our skin. It has driven it deep into our bones. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you will return. And then there is the emphasis on Lenten disciplines. But have we not been living Lent already for almost a year? Do we really need to give up anything more when we have given up so much already? And our losses go beyond gatherings with friends and family or even singing in church. As one journalist pointed out recently, we also miss the spontaneity of simply living our life out in the open. Those random conversations with strangers, the taken for granted freedom of spontaneity, of spontaneously leaning into someone just ever so slightly in order to hear what they're saying. And don't we all long for the day when we will be back to that basic freedom we took for granted? To be able to go out the door without having to remember to put on our mask or to take our mask with us. I know that I'm always forgetting and having to go back and go back and take my mask. Yes, because we've given up so much already, I question whether the usual Lenten disciplines is what we need this year. Even our social media accounts and our devices. In past years, it's been in vogue to go on a social media fast. But in these last 12 months, our phones and devices, or whether it's a mobile phone or a landline, and our social media accounts, they've been lifelines for us, keeping us afloat, preventing us from drowning in the waters of isolation. So if some of the rituals and disciplines of Lent seem out of place this year, I've been wondering what Lenten practices the pandemic might be nudging us toward when we consider our observation of Lent. And as I pondered, I was drawn to the practice of lament. Christian author Rachel Held Evans, in her last blog post before she died, wrote that Lent is for lamenting, by which she meant Lent is for those who have something to lament over. She wrote that not a day goes by that someone doesn't reach out to me in person or online to tell me they feel betrayed by their family of faith, by what has been done and by what has been left undone. She was specifically talking about those who in that year of 2019 had felt wounded or betrayed by their church, specifically by the evangelical church's embrace of Trumpism, by the United Methodist Church's divisions over LGBTQ inclusion, and by the abuse scandals that continue to rock the Roman Catholic Church as well as the Southern Baptist Convention. In that last blog post before her death, she encouraged her readers to embrace the 40 days of Lent as a season of lament, where the wounding could be acknowledged and the journey toward healing begun. Friends, in the 2 years since then, there has continued to be much wounding by what has been done and by what has been left undone. Our losses and wounds in Canada may be somewhat different, but our pandemic-ravaged world is suffering. As Bishop Susan highlighted in her sermon a few weeks ago, the pandemic has exposed existing inequalities. While we worry about the delays in vaccine delivery, many poorer countries have not yet received their first dose. And while we have grown tired of keeping our social bubbles small, those living in overcrowded refugee camps, or homeless shelters in our own cities, or in crowded substandard housing in remote Indigenous communities only wish they could have the privilege of keeping themselves in a bubble and away from others and the risk they carry. We have much to sorrow over and lament. Canada continues to be the only G7 country without a national housing strategy, one of the consequences of which are 3,634 people in the Greater Vancouver area who have no place to call home, 121 of which live on the North Shore, according to the last homeless count. I could continue to give you more numbers and statistics pointing to the wounding we inflict on one another by what has been done and by what has been left undone. Numbers like 467 species that have gone extinct in the last decade, or that 70% of trans and non-binary youth in Canada have experienced discrimination, or that 48% of Indigenous peoples in British Columbia did not report experiences of discrimination because they thought they would not be believed, or that 80% of the more than 20,000 deaths from COVID-19 in Canada have been in long-term care homes. Yes, I could continue to give you more numbers, but statistics do not really register. And our exposure to the constant daily barrage of numbers going up can have the effect of making us go numb or indifferent to the suffering those numbers represent. How then shall we observe a holy Lent? Pope Francis encourages us, rather than renounce our own comforts, we instead devote ourselves to fast from indifference. As long as I am relatively healthy and comfortable, I don't think about those less well off. Bishop Susan also alluded to this when she spoke about one of the pandemic's consequences, our tilt toward insularity, narrowing the focus of our concern to our bubble, to our country's ability to get vaccines, so that along with the virus, there is a pandemic of indifference to other people's and creatures' suffering, a pandemic of indifference sweeping across the world. The purpose of Lent has always been to startle us awake to the true state of our hearts and the world we've made. So how do we fast from indifference? I am suggesting that a place to begin is with lament, to practice the discipline of lament, to see and name the wounding, to name the evil and injustice, and then to speak out and do something about it. But how can we lament or join in solidarity with the suffering of others if we do not lament for ourselves first, if we do not get in touch with our own uncomfortable feelings first? That is why I am inviting us to do Ash Wednesday and Lent a little differently this year. Lament is something that most of us don't do very often. The word calls up emotions of sadness and regret, not a comfortable space for most of us. Yet lament can also be a gift, helping us to process our emotions and move toward healing. The invitation of Lent is to lean into the awkwardness and vulnerability. On Ash Wednesday, I'm inviting us as God's church, as God's community at Gloria Dei to gather together in the only way possible for us right now, and that's online, to gather by Zoom and to participate in a service of lament for our brokenness, for all that we have lost or been shattered by in this last year, not only by the pandemic, but also other events in our lives. Loss of loved ones, ruptures in relationships, the shattering that isolation brings. And then in each of the following weeks of Lent, to gather again midweek for a short service, not longer than 25 minutes, to gather midweek to name an injustice that exists in our world, that we witness, that is very obvious to us, that we witness or have been complicit to, or at least complacent about, and to name that injustice and to gather to pray, to worship, and then to act. And so in each week of Lent, we'll focus on one injustice, the injustice of poverty and homelessness, the injustice of environmental degradation and mass extinction of species, the injustice of the stigma of mental health, the injustice of racism against people of color and indigenous people, the injustice of a culture that still privileges heterosexual individuals and relationships and discriminates against the LGBTQ plus community, including discrimination against transgendered and non-binary persons. Because, my beloved ones of God, unless our prayers and our songs and our piety and our devotion to God changes our hearts, we are like a noisy gong or clanging cymbal, according to the scriptures. God lays it out in the words of the prophet Isaiah. The kind of fasting I want is this: remove the chains of oppression and the yoke of injustice, and let the oppressed go free. Beloved ones of God, I look forward to walking and lamenting with you in these 40 days of Lent. I look forward to meeting together on Ash Wednesday at 7:30. In the meantime, God bless you all.